My name is Mary Alice Coffman, and I've lived in Carpinteria all my life, which is 83 years.
Nice. Mary Alice, do you recall when the city of Carpinteria was incorporated in 1965, and how did you feel about it at the time?
Well, I was on the committee against, and I just thought that the town was doing fine under the Board of Supervisors, and it's the way it had always been, and so I guess maybe I wasn't as forward-thinking as I should have been.
Well, how do you feel about it now? Do you feel it's a good thing now that we're an incorporated city?
Well, it's a given fact, and I think that they try to do a pretty good job.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm just going to double check the shot there. What schools did you go to in your youth? And tell me what your favorite things were about school and your least favorite things about school.
Well, the old grade school, you've probably seen pictures of it, where the pool is now. That was kindergarten through 8th grade. And I was in one of the first kindergarten classes. In fact, I was only 4, but they needed an extra person to be able to start the kindergarten. One of my aunts was a teacher there. And so I went to kindergarten for 2 years and graduated from the 8th grade, and then went to the high school, which is now the middle school. I don't know what was my favorite thing. Music. I was always interested in music. I'd started piano lessons when I was about 5. And I took violin lessons. I can't remember who our music teacher was, but we had an orchestra, and I played the violin. So that sort of got me started on my, you can't call it a career, but that got me started.
Do you still play music?
Yes, had been organist. From the time I was 13, I was an organist at Mount Carmel Church in Montecito. And then I was still taking lessons when I was 16. I graduated from high school and quit lessons on organ and piano when I went away to college. I played for St. Joseph's Church. They used to have a choir that now the whole congregation sings. But I played there for probably 10 to 15 years. But then when my children were getting bigger and I was driving baseball teams and football teams and things like that all the time, I finally gave it up, which was about 40 years ago, and then I started again last July.
Good for you. So do you feel that your exposure to music in school at an early age led to your interest in music the rest of your life?
I think so. I play quite a few instruments very badly, but I can play them. The piano, the organ, accordion. Jane Bianchin and I used to play the accordion together.
Really?
We were in the high school band.
Huh.
And the violin, of course, and the steel guitar.
Fun. How would you say music enriches your life? Does it?
Oh yes, I've always got some tunes that I like to compose for my own benefit, and so I've always got some tunes whirling them around my brain.
I know there's been some discussion of whether to continue having an orchestra or a band in our different schools because of the cost, but I guess from your point of view, it's definitely...
Oh, we had wonderful music things. Mr. Greena was our music teacher in high school, and he found out I was sort of a quick study, and so he'd made up a string quartet, and he needed a viola, and so he decided I could play the viola. And I just absolutely hated every second of it. But it's much bigger than a violin, and it's written in a middle key. So you're constantly, it's like learning a new language, you're constantly transposing. But I did that, and then occasionally I felt would fill in on the bass viol and the cello.
Do you remember Principal Wyckoff?
He came after I graduated from the grade school, but my sister had him.
Now, I've read about him here and there. What was the deal with him?
Well, he was an Olympic champion runner. I can't remember what he ran, a mile or whatever. But he and his wife and I guess he had a family. I don't even know how many years. After I graduated from grade school, the school was condemned. I don't know whether I had anything to do with that or not. But the kids went to school in tents. But I was a big high schooler by that time, so I wasn't too terribly interested.
What were the fashions of what did kids wear to school, and what did they wear in their free time?
Oh, dresses for school. In free time were usually jeans.
Did girls wear jeans?
Oh yeah. Well, my friends and I wore jeans because we did a lot of hiking and riding horses and things like that.
Tell me, where did you hike?
Well, two of my best friends were Nancy Franklin Peary and Pat Hales Griffith. The Hales Ranch was up Livingston Canyon, so we used to, on Saturdays, we'd hike. I'd ride my bike up to Pat's, and we would hike all the way back through Livingston Canyon and up the creeks. Way in back of the Smiths was the last house.
Livingston Canyon, is that near Gubernador? Where is that?
No. You know where the Bliss property is, you know, when you make your corner after you've gone past the Lions Club? Okay.
Right by Carpinteria Creek.
Yeah. It's the way to Kate's school, only you keep going on Livingston Canyon, clear to the end. And then there were just, well, trails, probably we helped make some of the trails, but we'd hike up there, or else we would go to Nancy's grandfather's, who was on, what's the name of that ranch? It was the old Franklin Ranch, and there were caves way back up in there. It's the road that goes straight back to the, you know, are you familiar with the Horton Ranch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, could you start this part over? Could you say, and we'd hike up near where the Horton Ranch is today, and there were caves. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, past the Franklin and the Horton Ranches, and just kept going. And then you get back in the mountains there, and we found caves and things like that that were very, very interesting. Or else on the Franklin Ranch, which is where the high school is now, we would hike up past...
This is up the Franklin Trail?
No, this would be, you know, the road that, 192, Foothill Road. You go past the high school, and then you make a turn, and then you make another turn. Well, before you make the other turn, you just go straight back up.
Oh,
And that's where the Franklins lived, and we would hike back up in there.
What type of animals or wildlife would you see there?
I don't recall that we ever saw very much.
What did you like about hiking in the hills?
I don't know, it was just something to do. Our fathers would go deer hunting back up in the mountains there, sometimes for days at a time. And after a deer hunting trip, it was always really fun for us kids because they would generally rent the horses from Harb Morris, who had the blacksmith shop. And so when they came back, they would take the horses back to the blacksmith shop and call their wives to come get them. And we kids would get to ride the horses then, as Harb took them back to his ranch, which was over on, it was either off Santa Monica or Yeah, I think it was off Santa Monica Road,
Where was the blacksmith shop?
down on Linden Avenue.
Oh, where Joe Woolbrent had
Yes,
his shop?
right, exactly.
Did Joe take it over from him?
Yes.
Uh-huh. So that's been there many years.
Oh, many, many years.
Uh-huh. Nice. I know the Franklin Trail may reopen again soon, and I guess that'd be wonderful to have the community have an opportunity to get up in the hills again.
Yeah. Yes, we children were very, very fortunate because we had the run of the ranches and things like that. And we could hike where we wanted. And in fact, our children could too. But nowadays, we wouldn't dare let our children, in fact, my children could ride their bikes down to the beach and so forth by themselves, but I wouldn't let my grandchildren do that at an early age.
So why do you feel now people can't go on the ranches?
Well, I can't remember, they called it the red something or other, but people, it was a disease of the trees, the lemon trees, and the avocado trees, rather, that could be borne by feet going through and animals coming through and whatnot from one orchard to another orchard. It was a red rust or something, I can't remember what they called it, but it was very, very dangerous, and that's how we lost an awful lot of our avocado orchards.
And then since then, people have been discouraged from going on to private properties of orchards?
Definitely.
And why would you discourage your grandchildren from riding their bicycles to the beach now?
Well, there's so many strange people in town now. And back in my day, like some of the ladies, we would think that they were just busybodies because they were always asking us questions and whatnot. But when you look back on it, they were interested in you, and people knew you. And if your kids did something wrong, if we kids did something wrong, you can bet that our mothers and fathers knew it immediately. And now you just don't have the
oversight?
The common touch.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because maybe everything's relative. I moved to town in '91, and one thing I like about town is there are a lot of families in town and extended families, so kids don't seem to get into mischief as much in this town because there's a relative or someone will know them and they're not as anonymous. But I guess your feeling is they're more anonymous now than they were back in your day.
Exactly.
I guess maybe everything's relative in a way. What did your father do for a living?
Well, he had I can't remember what year the dairy closed, or rather was sold and moved down the road, you know, where the Canalino and St. Joseph's Church are. Across there was the people that bought the dairy. It was the Monta Vista Dairy, and it was sold and moved there, and then the freeway came through and everything. But before that, before the freeway came through, that was probably in the 50s, early 50s. My uncle, one of my uncles, had a garage downtown on Linden, and my father went into business with him, and so then that's what their careers were. They had the Hebel Garage.
Now, tell me about, so your father worked for a dairy, is that right? And what was the name of it, and where was it?
The Monta Vista Dairy on Linden.
About where the freeway is?
Right.
And what was the Monta Vista Dairy?
What do you mean?
Well, I guess, were there a lot of cows? Or
oh, yeah, they had a lot of cows and whatnot. And Dad had the route, the delivery route, so he was a milkman.
He was the milkman back in your day. And so, and where would the cows graze?
Well, it's the freeway now. Freeway and the Linden Bridge and whatnot. None of that was there, of course. So it was all flat land, and Linden Avenue was there, and so of course there was all fenced along Linden at that point.
What was the dairy on both sides of Linden?
No.
Was it on the L.A. side or the Santa Barbara side?
Santa Barbara side. And then part of it, well, you know where Sawyer Avenue is. That was the western end or southern end. Do we face south?
We face south, right.
Okay, that was the southern end. And then the northern end would have been that first house next to the freeway on the other side of the bridge. Only, of course, the bridge was not there then.
What was it like when the freeway came through town? How did it affect things, and how did people feel about it?
Well, the pain in the neck, frankly. But
How so? Because of all the construction?
yeah.
And was it inconvenient to people that there was this big road going right through the middle of town and some streets were interrupted?
Well, it didn't affect us. Of course, I was already living here.
You live here on Starr Pine Road.
Yeah. And well, we bought it in 1947.
Do you remember what it cost your home cost in 1947?
Well, it wasn't the home that it is now, but it was $5,250.
Huh.
We got that paid off in 2 years, and then started building on and borrowed money again, and so then we got that paid off in 10 years, and then borrowed money again and finished the house.
Did it seem like a bargain at $5,000 then, or did it seem like a lot of money then?
Yeah, because my husband certainly wasn't making an awful lot of money at that point.
So it did seem expensive then?
No, not really terribly expensive, because we'd been paying rent. But I think our rent, we were still under rent control or something, and I think we were only paying, we had a nice cottage on Sandyland next to the near the castle.
You mean Casablanca?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Santa Claus had just the little date shop. That was all that was there. That was across the tracks from us. And so our rent was, what, $52 a month, and I don't think that our payments on the house were much more than that.
Nice.
My husband had saved some from the war, so we had a rather nice down payment.
What did your husband do during World War II?
He was a glider pilot, and he was stationed in England and was in the European War.
What did glider pilots do during the war?
Oh, they took in, he was in quite a few of the big battles.
Really?
They would fly, the gliders would be picked up by I can't remember the name of the transport planes.
A large plane?
Large plane.
It would be towed into the air?
Uh-huh. And they would be loaded with, at one time when one of his crashed, they usually crashed when they landed.
On purpose?
No.
Wow.
But he was carrying a couple of jeeps and a bunch of soldiers. Sometimes, other times they would be carrying just troops. He was in a troop carrier command.
And why were gliders used rather than airplanes? Because they were quieter?
You know, I really don't know, but it was quite something to be a glider pilot.
Really?
And he was, at first they were not officers, but they were quite far up. It was under the Army, and rather than the Air Force. But then he became a second lieutenant while he was over there, and then when he finally retired, he was a major.
Did he ever get injured in a landing?
Oh yeah, he broke his wrist one time.
Wow.
But after they landed, they would have to get to a certain place for transportation back to England again.
Like, where would they land? In Italy or France? Or?
Yeah, I don't think he was in any of the Italy thing, but he did a lot of France and Germany,
and
Holland.
Were you married when he was
No.
in service? Did you know your husband then?
Well, I was a freshman when he was a senior in high school, and seniors didn't really pay much attention to freshmen. No, it was at a bridge party that I we started going together after the war.
Uh-huh. And was it love at first sight, or was it,
No, but it was convenient. I mean, he was back from the service, and I had been working in San Francisco for the OPA, which was the Office of Price Administration.
Price Administration?
Office of Price Administration,
And
OPA.
what was that?
Well, you're too young really but during the war we had rationing of meat and shoes, gasoline, oil, things like that. And my job, when I got out of college, I quit college. I was just about between my junior and senior year, and worked in San Francisco for this Office of Price Administration. And so I kept track of gasoline records and oil records for 7 western states. And then, so I got so that, like if some station in Podunk, Nevada, was selling, all of a sudden had a huge amount of gasoline sold, we knew that they were black marketing or doing something wrong, and we were sort of a policing outfit.
So people really did with a lot less during the war, I guess, huh?
Yes, it didn't bother me too terribly much. I was in college most of it.
What college did you go to?
At UCLA in Los Angeles. And so it affected me somewhat for the simple reason that my father, he didn't mind my mother going down and picking me up for like Easter vacation or something like that. But 2 trips bothered him because he needed that gasoline to go on fishing trips or hunting trips or shooting ducks or something like that.
I see. And he only had a certain amount of gasoline he was allowed to use.
So Mother said, all right, you get her back to school. And so that's when I started riding the train. The train would come through about 1 o'clock in the morning.
In Carpinteria?
In Carpinteria. And so Dad would have me down there at the train tracks, and he'd talk to the guy who took the tickets and so forth. And usually he would warn him that I was going to get off, and one of my sorority sisters lived in Glendale, so she'd go home and visit her mother at the time and pick me up in Glendale at about 7:30 in the morning. And I can remember sitting in a car, not another soul in that car, where what do they call them? Not an engineer, is it? That seats you in the plane?
Well,
trains?
The station master, or, well, I'm
no.
not sure. In the train, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, anyway, the train guy would put me in a car all by myself, and all the rest of the train would be full of soldiers or something like that. And my poor father at 1 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, then I would get off at Glendale, and my friend would be there, and we'd drive back to school.
Do you remember the old train depot that was at the train station here in Carpinteria? What was it like?
Oh, it was a wonderful old building. It would have made the most marvelous museum. But it was down, I think it was 65, 60, it's in the 60s sometime, 69. Anyway.
It was closed?
Yes, it had been closed, but all of a sudden, hardly anybody in town even knew they were going to take it down, and it was just gone.
Demolished?
Yeah.
I know there's some talk of creating a new train depot there based on the old one. Would you like that?
Well, they seem to be doing all right with that covered thing they have down there.
That's true. Did people use the train more in your youth than they do today?
I don't think so. We used it to go to San Francisco several times. I remember the World's Fair in '39 or something. We'd go up, and one of my friends went to Mills, and I took it up to visit her a couple of times. But I've probably been on the trains in Europe and Japan more than I have here.
Let's see, what else? You were mentioning the creeks that you would hike up. Were creeks in town different back in your day than they are today?
Well, I really haven't examined them today, so I couldn't tell you.
I know some of them are concrete and channelized, I guess.
Oh, we didn't have anything like that, no. The ones that I do remember the one up Lillingston Canyon was a beautiful creek. One Christmas, my mother had given me a suede jacket, and oh man, that was something to have a suede jacket. Mm-hmm. I was probably in my early teens, and we were I had it on, and we'd carry our lunches, and go way up, and we were on this little tiny trail up above this creek. It was a wide spot. In fact, we could have gone swimming there if we'd wanted, but I slipped and fell in the water with my jacket, and my mother would have a conniption.
That's funny. Were there any occasions when the whole town would gather in your youth, such as were there parades that people would come for, or other?
We really didn't have parades that I recall. One old memory, Franklin's. Have you ever been up to Franklin's Canyon?
No.
Okay.
Is that behind the high school, more or less?
No, keep going over.
South towards L.A.?
Yeah. What is the name of that? You know where the Rock Ranch was, where the girls' club is? That road that goes straight back?
I don't know the name of it, but back there?
Yeah. There was this big canyon, so there used to be picnics. People would picnic in there, and one time Miss Gooding, who was one of our teachers, I think she was 7th grade teacher, and she married Bob Baylord. Anyway, she used to put on these big fantasies, things that the whole school would be on, out on the yard at the school, the front yard. And she had this one that we did up at Franklin's Canyon, so the whole town, of course, came to it. And it was really neat. I can't even remember what it was about.
You call it a fantasy. It was some type of play?
It was a play. And they had the kids that had horses came riding down the side of the mountain, down into the thing, and everybody was just thrilled over the whole thing.
Well, the horses were part of the play?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I think Ramona, a play down south in L.A., has a similar type of thing where people come out of the canyon.
Yeah.
And I've heard about this gathering place. It was more or less opposite where Girls Inc. now is, right by the bottom of the hill.
No, it was back into the hills.
Oh, way back in the hills?
Yeah, well, not way back, but you'd have to go up past the Hortons and then to make your turn, like to go over to where Gid Franklin lived and the Bailey Ranch was. But before that, there's this one big hill, and the road just skirts by the hill and went right on into Franklin's Canyon. And
would people just sit on the ground, or how would that work?
Oh, they had benches and tables and things like that, and you could bring folding chairs and whatnot.
Sounds like a fun event.
It was.
Fun place to go to.
Yeah. Oh, Martha Jane Baylor really put on extravaganza. What was I in one of them? A rose or something, I think was in 2nd or 3rd grade, and we had these things coming up around our face with a tie, and then the leaves or whatever was beside us would reach over and pull a little string, and our roses would bloom.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great. Nice. That sounds like fun. And were there any hangout spots in town? I know there was Mills Drugstore. Maybe that was a little later on. Where else would people go? And
well, every Saturday when we were kids, we could go to the movies. And I lived over on 8th Street, so we would come over to Palm and up to the Carpinteria Avenue. And there was a candy store right where I think a flower shop has moved into it, where Brown's Realty office used to be. Well, right over on the Carpinteria Avenue was this candy shop, so we'd always stop at the candy shop, and for 10 cents you could get so much candy that
Really?
you could eat at the movie, which I think was 10 or 15 cents.
Did they sell candy at the movie theater then too, or not
I
necessarily?
think just popcorn.
And what, for example, would you watch at the movies back then?
Oh, they used to have the something, what do they call them, the cereals that would come on every Saturday.
Buck Rogers?
Yeah, Buck Rogers was a great one. That went on for years, I think. I can't really remember many of the movies we saw.
Would you also see newsreels, like during the war and so forth? Do you know what I mean by newsreels?
Yeah. Yeah, I think they still had them. I've never been much of a movie goer since I was a little kid.
Let's see. I know one of the questions in our Carp quiz segment was, what's the name of a local ska band? Which you may not be familiar with that type of music. It's kind of reggae music. But what type of music were you into, or were youth into on the whole when you were teenagers and young adults?
Oh, we liked, I guess you'd call it the big band era. Artie Shaw and Frank Sinatra.
Your eyes kind of lit up when you said Frank Sinatra.
Oh, I loved his singing. One of my sorority sisters, her father, she didn't live in the sorority house, she lived in Beverly Hills. And her dad had to go back to New York once for a week. And he was singing then at one of the Palace or someplace like that, and she'd go with her lunch in her hand and spend the whole day while he was doing his business.
And she would go hear Frank Sinatra sing?
Oh, yeah.
And how would you listen to the music? Would it be on the radio or records? Or?
Radio and records.
Do you remember when TV first came in?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, my parents got one of the first TVs, I think, in Carpinteria. My husband used to take the children over, or rather the two oldest ones, and they were quite young, to watch Beanie and Cecil.
I even remember that.
Again. And
that was the first TV you got in the early 50s?
yeah, the first one we got was a Philco, and the bottom part was a phonograph. It had wonderful sound. And this was our living room at that point. And
right where we are now?
Yeah. And so it was set right over here, and the kids would watch. They already had, what's that thing on Channel 10, not Romper Room?
Sesame Street?
Sesame Street, and things of that ilk. And we loved, oh, I can't even remember their names. It was a program of a bunch of skits.
It's not the Lawrence Welk show, huh?
No, I didn't like the Lawrence Welk show.
It wasn't that kind of big band music?
No. I think for my junior prom in college we had Artie Shaw's orchestra. I mean, it was really something fantastic.
What type of dancing would you do to that music?
Oh, they had, I guess now you call it rock and roll. Back in those days.
Was it swing dancing?
Swing.
I know that, in fact, I'm going tonight with my wife to a swing dance at the Carrillo Rec Center in Santa Barbara, so there still is swing dancing.
Yeah, well, and I can remember in the high school, they had swing dancing too.
Okay, let's see what else. Can you recall any slang expressions or fads that were in your youth or when you were a young adult?
Not really.
Okay. That's okay.
We were pretty conservative.
Okay. Now you live here on Starr Pine Road. Tell me about this community.
Well, we used to have, once a year, we would have a get-together for lunch, and everybody brings something, and they put a couple of tables out and whatnot, and we all would converge on that. We had 4th of July parades for a little while, which were so corny you wouldn't believe.
Really? Right on here on Starr Pine?
Oh, yeah. Well, I can remember my husband and I would take a couple of the outside chairs and sit out in the front and watch the parade go down the street and then watch it come back again.
That's funny.
You'd have Nancy Mayer would roller skating, and Nancy, the Mayers had been a long time owners on this street, and the Pop Nose.
You were saying something earlier about there was some talk about making the Starr Pine go through to Casitas Pass. And,
oh, definitely.
And what's that story? Or?
Oh, well, they were going to put over on Casitas. Oh, here.
Yeah, thank you.
Over on Casitas, they were going to put a housing thing, and they wanted to bring Starr Pine all the way through to Casitas. So everybody got on their high horse, and we all got together and had a big meeting and fought it, and it didn't happen. Mr.
Stein?
Yeah, Brad Stein bought the property, thank God, and so it won't go through. The property used to be owned by Dude Baylord, and Dude was a friend of my folks, and we talked about this once years and years ago when we first bought here. And Dude assured me that that would never happen at that time. And of course, Dude was dead by this time. And so it was rather threatening.
Mm-hmm. I hadn't heard of Dude Baylord. Is that Dude, D-U-D-E?
Uh-huh.
I like that name.
Well, I think his name was Donald.
Uh-huh. And so Starr Pine's been a nice little street and community, and I guess you all know each other.
Definitely. Uh-huh. There used to be quite a few children on the street. I guess there's some coming along now. When we moved here, my youngest son
Is that
was
Scott?
my oldest son, Zale, was not quite a year old. And then we soon had our second son here. So all my children grew up on this street. And it must have been a trial for the neighbors. I don't know how many times we broke the window next door when the kids were playing baseball. Chuck McGilvery from the hardware store finally asked me not to measure the windows anymore because I always had the measurements wrong. He would come and measure them himself when we were replacing the windows for our neighbors.
Do you recall when there were jalopy races and what was called Thunderball in the Upper Bluffs?
Yeah.
Well, what was that like? What went on there?
Well, the only time our fathers would take us kids when they had these little tiny cars, and I can't remember what they call. I guess they weren't jalopies; were full-size cars, weren't they?
I would think so.
No, these were smaller racing cars, and they would go around and round and round, and they were fun.
Huh? Was there a track for them to race in?
Oh yeah.
And where would people sit?
In the grandstands.
Huh? So. Was that every Friday night or something?
I really don't remember. It wasn't something that you went to year after year after year or anything like that.
Did people get hurt in the jalopy races?
I don't recall any.
Okay. You know, maybe we could put a little more fire on the fireplace.
Okay, are we off?
We're still on. If we could just, I'll remove your mic. If we could just kind of do it quick, I'd appreciate it. Yeah, sure. You're doing good, by the way. This is interesting. I'll take this off here. Okay. Nice wood to burn. Okay, that's good. Thank you. I'll put another one of these on too. Okay.
Incidentally, we had the fireplace built and then Joe Willebrand
Oh, Joe.
did our thing.
Nice.
He was in my husband's class.
Uh-huh.
You want ABC again or 1, 2, 3?
No, I don't think we need to. Let's see. Actually, say ABC again. Can you say ABC? Oh, why don't I hear anything? Testing, testing. Count to 3.
1, 2, 3.
It's kind of like your mic went off suddenly. I wonder if I turned it off accidentally. So now it got turned off. Count to 3 again.
1,
Okay,
2.
now we're good. Okay. Move the microphone right here. Let's see. There was one question in Carp Quiz about the day about being able to take toxic waste to City Hall. Were people less careful back in your day about trash, or are people more careful about dumping stuff on the ground today, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that.
Yeah?
I don't think we had any thoughts of toxic waste or anything like that back in those days.
So things have changed in that way. There's more of an awareness of not
Definitely.
Of if we throw stuff on the ground, it can wash down to the ocean and so forth.
Definitely.
Back in your day, the beaches were never closed, were they?
I don't recall ever being closed.
Yeah.
We didn't have the mounds. What do they call those things?
Oh, the sand berms?
The sand berms and things. Then, but we had dunes.
Sand dunes?
Sand dunes, which seem to be disappearing, where they put in the motels and things like that, or whatever they call
The rental properties?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I remember hearing there were more sand dunes back then. Was the Rincon Causeway before your day? Do you remember? Do you know about that?
I don't recall too much about it, but I remember hearing my parents speak of it. It was made of wood, you know.
Right.
And
what was it? It was like a bridge that went between Rincon and Ventura?
Ventura, uh-huh. And my family were newcomers here to Carpinteria. My grandfather first came, I guess, in about 1912, and really liked it. He and my grandmother and their 3 youngest children. My they stayed, I don't know for how long at that point, but decided that they would move back. They were friends of the Sawyers from Wisconsin, and so then they moved permanently out here in about 1918 or 1919. And my grandparents had used that causeway. I guess when they, it was an interesting story when they sold their properties in Wisconsin and moved out. And I didn't hear about this until one of my aunts had died, and I was at the funeral, and they were talking about it. And the grandfather rented 2 great big box cars. They put all of their stuff that they wanted to bring out, furniture and tools and things like that, in the 1.5 of the box cars, and the other half they had cots. It was my grandfather, my grandmother, my 2 aunts, and my youngest uncle. So there were 5 of them. Uncle Fritz was probably about 8, or no, 6 or 7. But they had a stove in there and their cots. And I mean, they could just camp in this thing. I guess when the box cars would stop in a city or something, they'd buy groceries and so forth. And I don't know how long it took them to get out here, but when they got to Los Angeles, the Sawyers were there to meet them. And then about a month or so later, the box cars were left off over here on sidings for them to unpack.
Really?
But I'd never heard of anybody moving like that. But
Yeah.
he brought a lot of his farm equipment with him and things like that. So that's how they made their move.
Was your grandfather a farmer?
Yeah, yes, they owned several farms in Wisconsin. Grandmother owned some, and grandfather, and so they.
Did they farm here in Carpinteria too?
No, my grandfather, I think, was about 46 at the time, and had retired. But after he got here, there's properties all over town that grandfather had bought, and when they put the breakwater in at Santa Barbara, you know, it changed our beaches, and so a lot of the cottages were in danger of washing out, and so grandfather bought quite a few of them and moved them onto properties that he owned. He had built over on the corner of Olive and 8th, and he owned quite a few lots over in that area.
So what happened was when the breakwater was built for Stearns Wharf in Santa Barbara, it changed the currents and the sand flow, and many beachfront homes were either washed away or in danger of it. Is that right?
They were in danger of it, so the people that were buying them and moving them, and so that grandfather, it goes through my mind quite a few places around town when you drive down a certain street. Oh, grandfather moved that house there, grandfather moved that house there. In fact, the old Sears house, you know, on 8th,
right,
that used to be on the corner of Maple and Carpinteria Avenue. And it was either fall of 39 or spring of 40. I was a senior in high school, and one day we were sitting in class, and one of the boys looked out over the football field and said, "Oh, hey, there goes a house by." And it suddenly dawned on me that's the day they were moving grandfather's house. He paid $850 on an auction and bought the house, and then I can remember it cost him something like $1,200 or $1,300 to move it down Maple and up 8th Street, and he thought that was highway robbery. But they had to take down wires and telephone poles and everything else to get that house moved.
And how did they move it? Did they pull it with a truck or horses?
With a truck.
Wow, that's something. I know there are quite a few houses around Carpinteria today that have been moved from other areas.
Another one he moved is on the corner of Palm and Willow. Another one is over on Maple. There were quite a few that he owned around there. And then, of course, he built several houses on Olive and 8th.
In your youth, what crops do you remember in the Carpinteria Valley?
What crops?
Crops.
Lemons, tomatoes, avocados.
Were walnuts in your time too, or was that before your time, perhaps?
Well, probably the biggest bunch of walnuts was up near the school.
The high school?
The high school.
Is now? Mm-hmm.
Of course, where the high school was lemons.
Mm-hmm.
But this had been a walnut orchard, this particular lot of ours, so I imagine there were other ones along here, but this was...
Here on Starr Pines.
Yeah, the houses next door and this way, well, the house next door were already built when we moved here, but not the rest of them going down up Starr Pine. But when I first started gardening in this area, I would find lots of old walnut shells and things.
Mm-hmm. And how about lima beans? Were those before your time, or do you remember?
That was before my time, but you know, the Ford Hook lima bean was developed here. The beans used to be climbers, I guess you'd call it. They were had poles that they would come up, and then it was developed here. The bush bean, which is the Ford Hook, and that was finally it was too big of an industry for the valley, and it was sold to somebody in Ventura and Oxnard area, and you know those great big fields they have down there. It was perfect for them.
Mm-hmm. But it was developed here?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, are there any other things that come to mind you'd like to talk about, how things were in your younger days, or how things have changed?
Well, my children were born two of them in the late 40s and the rest in the 50s. I had 5. And one thing that comes to mind that I will never forget, we had a big black dog that used to always go with the kids on their bikes and whatnot, and they would ride downtown to the beach or around and visit their friends and whatnot. And one time they came, the older ones, 3 older boys came riding into the yard and said, Mom, come see what we've got. And I went out and they had a bag, and in this bag they had pills and what do you call it?
Syringes?
Syringes and things like that. I said, where on earth did you get these? And they said, look, they haven't even been touched. And they had gotten them at Mills Drug in one of the dumpsters and brought them home. And we were all excited about it. They said, maybe these are good pills or something like this. And I took it all and I immediately called Jeff. And I said, Jeff, do you know what my children just got out of your dumpster? And told him, and I thought he would die.
That's funny.
But
do you have any advice for young people today on how to get ahead in life and how to be happy?
Well, I've been very, very fortunate, Larry. My children are all doing well. My grandchildren are all doing well. I think education has a lot to do with it. I have 7 grandchildren. Well, 4 of them are still in college. But the ones that have graduated, we have a lawyer and a hydrologist and a social worker that have already graduated. And 2 of them are married. I have 2 great-grands.
Really?
And they've all done well. My own children have done well. My oldest son is an engineer. My number 2 son has worked in Europe for 30 years. He's retiring for the Department of Defense. He was when he first moved over, he was a school counselor for about 25 schools in the Nuremberg area, but then they closed all those bases, and then luckily he'd kept up his teaching credential, and so he's been teaching at Ramstein Air Force Base since then. My number 3 son has worked, he lives in Nevada, in Sparks, Nevada, and he works for a publisher printing company. My one daughter is can't think of the word she is. She works for the Hollister Ranch as their
conservator? Or?
No, Board of Architectural Review.
Oh,
And she also was chosen this past year to serve on the I think they call it the Central Coast BAR, from Gaviota through San Ynez, Buellton, for all those towns up there.
And then your younger son, Scott?
Then Scott is battalion chief for the Carpinteria Summerland Fire Department. So they're...
That's great. And did you feel like you had a good marriage, and any tips on how to stay married?
Yeah, well, no, I don't have any tips. Husbands were different in those days than they are now. Excuse me. My children, who are fathers or mothers, or mother, the husband have all helped with the children and everything. I don't think it ever occurred to my husband to change a diaper or anything like that.
So it was different back then.
And another thing, remember, he was military.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when we would watch TV, if the national anthem came on, all our children would stand up and salute.
That's fun. Overall, I guess you feel like you've had a good life growing up here in Carpinteria?
Definitely. I've been fortunate enough. I owned a travel agency, or was part owner for many years. And so I had the opportunity to travel in Asia and Europe. My last trip to Europe was my 17th.
Wow.
And South America and around Australia, New Zealand. And this is best.
Nice. Well, very nice talking with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that should do it. It was a good interview. I'll take your microphone off.
Will I get a copy of this?
Yeah, I'll give you a copy of it. So that you and your family can have it.
Yeah. David was...
Okay, 1, 2. Mary Alice, what do you do in your free time now?
Well, I'm very interested in our Carpinteria Museum. One of my aunts was one of the original begetters of the museum. In fact, the newer wing that we have was named after her, Anna Nygren Hebel wing. And I wasn't interested at all at first, but when I retired, she got me interested in it. And so I've been working with the museum with the volunteers for about 20 years, and now I am the president of the Board of Trustees.
Would you recommend other people to become volunteers at the museum?
I would love to have more volunteers, especially docents.
And for those who haven't been to the museum, what type of things can they see there?
Well, our museum is strictly about Carpinteria's history and Summerland. And the things we have are from people, from original settlers and things like that. One time I had these people that came in, they were from Europe, and he wanted to know about Pizarro. I explained that we don't go to other countries and things like that, that this is strictly Carpinteria.
And for those who don't know, where is the museum?
It's near the corner of Maple and Carpinteria Avenue.
Great collection there. I also recommend people to come to our local museum and enjoy it.
Well, you know, I've been a docent for 20 years, and it's a joy showing people around because they are so interested in it.
It's a wonderful treasure, and David Griggs does a great job at the museum.
Oh, I don't know what we'd do without David.